Hello and welcome to today's episode of Monarchism Unfiltered. I'm one of your hosts, Bronze.
And I'm your second, and for the first time today, last host, Bronze.
Yes, sadly I am, due to personal life issues, can no longer be part of the usual cast, or even might even not be part of any future episodes. Life has its ways of getting into stuff, I guess. And apparently, I am unable to speak today, I guess.
It's very difficult, with the speech and everything. Still so
Yeah, especially. Yeah. Still, on today's episode, we've decided to pick on the rather curious topic of nostalgism, with a particular focus on, the golden standard, autarchy, and, calling it here and phoning it in, colonialism.
Oh yeah. But really, the thing we're most nostalgic for is a time when there were 3 hosts.
That got too real too quick, Bronze. Come on now.
Come on, okay. No, we gotta take it up a few levels. We can't go into the pit this soon.
Yeah, it's 1 minute 29 and already. Come on, where's that British stip up the lip? Lip. Not
yeah,
lift.
We're gonna stiffen the lips. Yeah, so nostalgism is a big thing on the internet, especially in our neck of the woods. It's like, oh, we gotta go back. There's the thatched roofs and the gold standard and the autarchy and the stuff.
Viciously invading countries and oppressing their people.
Yeah, that was also that is also part of it.
Yeah, I mean, nostalgism is a strong. Okay. First, before we actually start discussing the thing, we best define the thing, at least for the purposes of this episode.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I'll go with my definition, then you tell me what you think. So, nostalgism, for the context of this episode, basically refers to the typically misinformed, idealized view of the past or of X element of the past, without fully A, contextualizing it, B, understanding why it worked or didn't work, and C, the ever so slight fetishization of said past. Again, for us, it's tragically our God, I was about to say Portuguese expression that doesn't work in any English-speaking environment. It's simply our bread and breakfast. That also doesn't work. Fuck me.
Our bread and butter.
Wow. That's the one.
Our bread and
God.
breakfast.
Come on now.
Come on, we're gonna make up for the banter gap. We gotta.
Yeah, by my newfound inability to speak. We
both have to become 50% more charismatic for this to work.
Oh wow, way to dampen the mood. In any case, so nostalgism refers to this idealized view of the past, again, as said, couched upon a misunderstanding of said past, of what if we're talking about a specific element, of what made that element work and what made it stop working. It's this kind of decontextualization of the past that is often attached to nostalgism.
Yeah, no, it's like this broad yearning. That's the word I'd use. Yearning. There's the past, and things are bad now, and so there must have been a time when they were good, and yeah.
On a trivial sense, that is true. There must have been bad time now. Therefore, good time must have existed prior, or will eventually exist after. It's not to say that nostalgism is based upon complete fabrication and misunderstanding. It's just that when it comes to its informing of policy, is often lackluster. You see this you see this very clearly, and our listeners that are somewhat outside of our neck of the woods might have also listened. The gold standard, for example, is often touted as like bringing stability and growth to the financial system. Somehow,
but it's not entirely clear how this would happen. And as far as I can tell, the greatest argument for the gold standard was that it happened in the past. I mean, because it's not like, oh, we're gonna rise up against the neoliberal elites, whatever conception we have of what that word means, and then, they are now, and so the gold standard of yesterday must be the thing, even though, I mean, the gold standard would play perfectly. It is, if anything, an neoliberal economic move.
yeah. I mean, to boil it down to the in the weird hypothetical chance that you got to what, episode 29, without reading none of the previous 3 episodes where Bronze talk about economics, the real short answer is this: gold standard doesn't work because it logistically doesn't work, because there is a limited speed to how much gold, I guess, you can extract from the earth. And that speed is what dictates the pace of economic growth, period, and no other economic factors.
Well, some other economic factors, but it's essentially, it's like placing a cap on it, which is like, it's a really weird thing to tie the economy to, if you think about it, that there's like, oh, there's a mineral in the earth, there's loads of those, but we pick this one because it's shiny and we've known about it for long. Therefore, let's tie human endeavor to it.
Pretty much. Again, the major argument is that because gold has an intrinsic value, which, I mean, let's not go into that bit today, because I think we've already gone to it. If we haven't, well, someone will tell us, and we'll do an episode on it. Well, to be fair, the Q&A is coming right up, so that will also be a place to clear this one out in case anyone's curious. But suffice to say that the issue with the gold standard is that also because the main argument, emotional one, not necessarily a sense-making, is that the gold standard will counter inflation. The main issue with this claim is that the current economic dynamic that we're living in is so extremely deflationary. Is that how you say it?
That is how you say it, yeah.
So extremely deflationary that the need for a gold standard has become pointless. Essentially, to give a good example, we'll all remember when Trump issued his stimulus checks. During the height of the printing press, as it were, the value of the dollar went up rather than down. This has to do with a lot of weird well, not weird when you think about them, but this is to say that the current way the economy is structured globally is towards an extreme deflationary pattern.
I would just like to clarify that, because that, if you've taken economics 101 and nothing else, that will seem like a very sort of strange situation. And so the thing that happened was that the stimulus checks and the Wall Street Jerome Powell money printer go Burr whatever, that didn't really play into it. But at the same time as that, because there was this sort of global time of instability, all of the world wanted to have dollars, because fiat currency is a hedge against uncertainty. And what is the fiat currency in the modern world? It's the dollar. So do you want to hold whatever the local currency of your country is, when you could be holding dollars, which are seen as more certain? So so there was a concentrated buying of dollars from everyone all over the world, but it happened to coincide with this thing that had to do with making credit swaps for banks to like putting a floor on assets, and that didn't really play into it because that doesn't create any new spending, right? Because I think that when Copernicus came up with the, and I'm sorry we're going off on a tangent now, but I feel like this needs explaining. When Copernicus came up with the quantity theory of money, which states that, the quantity of money in the economy determines the price, which is true in the macroeconomics 101 sense, that, if there's more money in the system, then there's more money in prices. But what Copernicus couldn't account for, because he lived in the 1400s, is a conception of what the economy is. Because the economy, if you think about it in this way, is the sum of all the decisions made in, let's say, the world or the country or whatever. Right? But if you, do a credit swap, thereby increasing the amount of money, but that new money doesn't lead to any new spending or buying, then it doesn't affect prices, and so it doesn't create inflation, is the thing that some people misunderstood when we talked about it in episode 18, which we got comments about.
Surprisingly, it's often the episode where our certified, I actually forgot, where the person in the podcast with actual economic education says shit that people often get ballistic about, funnily enough.
Yeah, and it's very strange, but here's the thing. Here's the thing. No, it's like, it's not intuitive, that there's more money, but that somehow doesn't lead to more spending, which is why we got comments about how once people are able to go out again and spend at some hypothetical date in the future, they will discover that they have more money because clearly there has been created more money. But the truth is that people having more money to spend is not the reality that we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, that is just a sad truth, and that just goes to show how the global economy is structured in such a is structured in such a way that inflation effectively no longer exists, invalidating the sole, already dubiously beneficial, claim that the gold standard would end inflation.
Yeah, and because what inflation is the main point. Because you could suppose, okay, if the gold standard will end inflation, but where is the inflation? Because I don't really think that there exists inflation on a global sense in the world in any significant way. What we have is a very small de jure inflation, which is a de facto deflation. And if you wanna have this explained by someone who's way smarter than either of us, then you should look up a certain Polish economist called Michał Kalecki. In fact, I might link his 1943 paper, "The Political Consequences of Full Employment," in the description. It's very short. There's no calculus. Don't worry. In which he explains that if you were to have a political system such as Keynes explains, where you used fiscal tools to guarantee full employment, that will create an inflation, not because there's more money created by spending or some other such Friedmanite nonsense, but rather because if you have more employment, that creates a demand pull inflation. And so he explains how if such a system existed, and the inflation is most negatively affects those that already have assets, and asset holders have power in society, then asset holders will contrive a system which seeks to have as its guiding principles the limiting of inflations for the purpose of price stability, which is exactly what we did see happen in the 80s. And so it's very interesting to see Michal Kalinske predict this 40 years in advance.
Indeed.
So that's a paper that you should check out.
Yeah,
that
I'm
was,
sure we have
a quick rehashing of, why gold standard is a bit of a nothing and why inflation doesn't work like you might think it does.
Yeah, especially under the current economic paradigm.
That's right.
But still, I think that 15 minutes in, and we've utterly crushed gold bugs throughout the planet. Who knew?
Yeah, wow, who knew? I mean, I'm not surprised, to be honest. They're gold bugs.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's. I mean, this is an episode about nostalgism. It's not like any of the three topics we're touching here are any amount of particularly stable.
Yeah, no, it's so like the important thing about the gold standard isn't any particularity of it, but its thing as a phenomenon of like it was in the past, and clearly it because I think the gold standard thing comes out of an asset, like a truthful observation that things are kind of weird, and maybe they shouldn't be like this. Maybe this isn't how the world economy should work, because it feels like it should make more sense than this. But the truth is that the gold standard is not a good solution. And if you have a good solution, you should. I'd say email us, but probably you should email like important people first if you know how to figure it out.
Those still do email us.
Yeah, still email us. I want to be in on it. If you had a eureka moment while listening to this thing, I want a co-citation in your paper.
Name drop us in the manifesto. We need the clout.
We need the clout.
Of course. But yeah. Now,
yeah,
what's...
I'm
yours.
I'm setting up the transition.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, so the thing about the gold standard is that if you think it's a very mercantilist policy. And mercantilism, for some reason, is the nostalgia jackpot.
That is true. A lot of people are I mean, it doesn't even make sense, because any like marginal research on like mercantilism specifically, I know a lot of people are nostalgic for protectionism more so than mercantilism per se, but you still do find the mercantilism apologists. And did any of them read the actual social impacts of mercantilism? How that kind of caused famines inside said countries and led to widespread depopulation in some others.
Yeah, no, it's not good with the mercantilism. But so you have the gold standard, you have autarky, it's because if we need to accumulate the gold, then obviously, we got to grow our own shit. Apparently. And there is a sort of argument you can make, although you don't see it commonly made on the interwebs, which is the climate change argument for autarky.
There is a climate change variation.
Hold up. Yeah. And I mean, and it sort of works, but not in any. But the final product, if you follow it to a conclusion, doesn't look anything like autarky, because nationalism is cringe. We'll get there. So the climate change argument for autarky is that if you import food and other stuff from all over the world, right, then you have to ship it. And usually if you ship stuff in quantities significant enough to, feed nations, then you're transporting it with polluting means, whether that be ships or rail or trucks. And so if we could consume products created closer to home, there would be less transportation, and therefore less pollution.
That is almost insultingly simplistic.
It gets more nuanced than this, but obviously there are several angles of critique. One, because in the traditional autarkic mode, the unit that you're looking at is very much the nation state, or the empire. It doesn't have to the state, the highest, the top level state. Which these days often is a nation state. But there's no reason to make it the nation state, right? Because that's not an actual guarantor of locality, because the nation could be huge. Or, or it could have other nations close by. Right, so because I think that, it makes sense to have a drive, not like an autarchical process, but a drive towards more locally produced, let's say food, for one. But then again, there's no reason to limit it to food or any specific commodity.
Yeah, but the issue with that analysis stems from an overly simplistic fact, because if you're driving towards autarky, let's reduce the question to purely food, because that's the popular one, even though that's apparently somehow in the year 2020 we've forgotten how food preservatives work, because the main issue with food on the planet is not lack of production, it's just waste. But in any case, let's reduce the question just to food. The food cultivation typically requires tilled soil, unless, I don't know, you've just planted forests upon forests of apple trees and other fruit-bearing trees.
Yeah, that in of itself, cucumbers in pods.
Yeah. The issue is that ultimately this is not environmentally neutral in of itself. Indeed, fact, agriculture is not how am I going to put this? Is not environmentally neutral. In fact, agriculture consumes shit tons of water, which is why, like, southern Spain and I think Texas run into severe water problems.
It's not just southern Spain and Texas. It's quite a few places.
Well, yes, agriculture in general consumes tremendous amounts of water, and in fact drains water from the surrounding ecosystem. Dams, although often considered part of green energy, also and where most of the time local water for farming is stored, also tremendous environmental impact. So to me, because I was genuinely not familiar with this environmental argument for autarky, because it just seems so absurd from the outset, is that
it is quite absurd. Yeah, no, I would not claim that it is reasonable.
Yeah, because come on now,
it is the best one.
I mean, I guess it is more grounded than most other arguments for autarky I've heard, because, like, okay, now you made the environmental argument. Let's go to the ever traditional one. The hunger is bad, and a country should produce sufficient food to feed its people. Now, this seems fairly neutral, and indeed fact, neither me or Bronze are against any country investing more in the agricultural sector, because God knows they can use it from time to time. The ultimate issue is that when trying to achieve food self-sufficiency, you enter into two very clear issues. You enter into the self-evident economics one, the food you're producing costs more than the food that is cheaply manufactured and available on the market at the same time. Again, the traditional response to this, because autarky, and this is what auticists autarchists, sorry, I use a C because autarky in Portuguese means something completely different. So bear with me on that one, I'll be alternating. But autarchists often forget that autarky is an economic system within of itself and therefore must make money. And oftentimes autarky makes money by constricting access to alternatives, essentially. And not only does this traditionally result in lower quality products, it also more often than not results in very expensive products. And in the food market, in the food situation, this can be quite self-defeating if you implemented a food autarky to combat hunger. More to the point, and as we've said in the past, very rarely is the issue with food about food production per se. Again, the issue with hunger in the planet is not lack of food production. It hasn't been since what? Nitrates was first used as fertilizer? Well, maybe a bit after that.
I think it's sooner than that. If you're looking at a global scale, that there have been individual cases of hunger.
No, fair enough. Still, it's no longer the production is no longer the issue. It's waste. The amount of food that doesn't get sold, the amount of food that doesn't get stored properly. There's just a tremendous amount of waste. Indeed, fact, isn't it? Wasn't it like 2/3 of all food produced goes to waste?
It's not quite 2/3, but it is 1/3.
Oh, 1/3. Okay, that's
still.
I mean, that's still significant, but
yeah.
But it's less than like 2/3 because 2/3, even in my mind, was a bit too horrifying.
Yeah. But 1/3 is still not horrifying.
Yeah, that is true. So yeah, a lot of the issues with these considerations can be solved based upon like just diminishing waste within one's country, which is something that if autarchists truly cared about feeding the hungry, that is, rather than pushing whatever insane agenda they secretly want, because that's often the truth with autarchists, they would advocate for anti-waste policies or, rationing if they were that into abolishing food, both food.
If they were that based.
Oh God, we're going to eventually. Well, I guess.
One day we'll do the rationing episode. There'll be a series.
Wow, I mean, never mind that the one feudalism episode broke us in more ways than one.
Rationing is easier than feudalism.
That is true. Still, we can dream. The big thing with autarchists is often that they have a very simplistic view of A, the global economy, B, a very paranoid view of food, a very surrealistic, that's the word, about food insecurity and about hunger and food insecurity, and C, they don't seem to realize that food insecurity is a thing, and that's an actual real issue that impacts the wealthy nations of the West, which is a lack of access to food due to economic reasons. Now, this does not necessarily mean starvation per se, but it does mean incredibly monotonous diets or one meal a day type dynamics, which are
or just sporadic eating. Like unstable access to food. Or even if also of course you have because this is something that I've gone into quite a bit, is like, for example, a thing that doesn't appear as starvation but is in fact a very serious issue in a lot of developed nations is food deserts. That is, areas often in inner cities, often in economically disadvantaged communities already, in which it's simply not feasible to buy fresh food. That's to say that the only food options available are, processed foods or other unhealthy foods, which are
McDonald's.
often, which often, although it markets itself as cheap, is anything but.
Yeah, isn't the correct term for that like a social trap? or something along those lines, where people could just basically be trapped in like a dynamic that continuously pushes them down, even though they have no other choice.
Yeah, and a food desert is an example of a social trap. There is also often the not often considered psychological aspects, which is that, being food insecure, especially as a child, has massive psychological impact, throughout your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very serious problem, and I got to bring attention
Something
to it.
that something we should be talking about, more important people should be talking about, and something that autists who actually might actually care about hunger and starvation should consider before they start defending autarchy. Boris should be well aware of this before he stops not giving the kids lunch.
Yeah.
That's as topical as you'll get us, listeners. That's as topical as you'll get us.
Something that happened 4 months ago. We're hip.
We're hip with the 4-month-year-old kids.
Yeah. So sporadically hip, but usually we're hip to the 700 years ago kids.
Yeah, the type of kids that isn't aware of anything that happened 20 years ago to now. So, to continue with this somewhat scatterbrained approach, I think this about covers the autarchists, unless I forgot. There is a good example of this now, especially in our neck of the woods, the monarchist neck of the woods, even though it's closer to say the monarchist dark forest that goes all the way from Germany to the Hessian wood, throughout reaching Russian Thundrum woods, because it gets deep. There often is brought an example of Germany during World War I and the British blockade, and how somehow the people who know about that, because that's often a topic that's not often talked about, and the starvation that happened in Germany, they say about how Germany should have been more autarchical and how that would have given them enough food to wait out the war better. Here's the issue with this. Somehow these people know that happened and that there was a food shortage, but they fail to know that the issue with Germany in World War I during the blockade was, again, predictably, not exactly food production, but indeed fact, rationing.
Rationing. You got to nail it if you're doing a modern war.
Mm-hmm. Let me put it like this. People have heard talk about the British World War I and II rationing efforts, and rationing efforts of many countries that have been in either world wars. No one has exactly heard about the German rationing effort in World War II because it happened too little too late, and in World War I because it was a complete fucking train wreck throughout.
That said, I will say to the not quite defense of the Germans, I can't think of like a really good rationing scheme during the First World War.
True,
like
but
they were all pretty bad.
I understand that they were all pretty bad, but there is a distinction between the rationing scheme not being good enough and it being completely dysfunctional to the point of not actually working. Like the German rationing scheme, on admittedly the few literature I've been able to get on it over the years, had serious issues of corruption within it. Like like a massive black market sprung up almost immediately, and not only for like secondary trivialities like sugar and wine and other things, like these prestige goods. That was the case on the World War II British rationing scheme. We're talking black markets for grain, price dodging, you name it. The rationing scheme was dysfunctional from the outset.
Book flogging, which is where you sell your whole rationing book to someone else. which is, preventing that is rationing scheme 101. But they didn't get that far.
No, again, the system was horrifically dysfunctional, and that is what contributed to the very, well, not so much. I mean, the defeat of Germany in World War I is a bit of a complicated matter, but let's just say that failure of the rationing scheme was what contributed to the starvation that Germany was experiencing. Which is also kind of absurd when you consider that it shared a land border with Austria-Hungary, which was essentially a massive agricultural producer. So, like, what one would expect that even if they could not avoid some starvation, they could have avoided how bad it got via imports, but they didn't.
Yeah, no, I mean it got very bad for the Germans. Yeah,
got so bad that was the main reason they invaded Ukraine, to get access to the Ukrainian grain fields.
Yeah, it's the breadbasket of Europe.
Sadly, that did not pay out. Well, sadly or thankfully, depending upon your ideological, ethnic, and national inclination.
Well, sadly for the Germans, if anything.
Yeah, I suppose.
I don't mean the German nation is some sort of spiritual entity throughout time. I just mean like the Germans then and there, because I'm pretty sure they
also
they
there
didn't
exists no
want it to work out that
thing.
way.
Also, there exists no thing as a spiritual concept of a nation throughout time.
No, obviously not. That's why I wasn't referring to it.
Yeah, fair enough. Just to make that clear, in case you were wondering, dear listener, this podcast follows a hard anti-nationalist line. Do not question it.
Yeah, it's unquestionable.
Now, with a good example of that, I'm trying to think of other examples where protectionism / autarchy screwed over the country.
Soviet Union, 1920s.
Oh well, but that was war communism. Like that was.
Not war communism. Like late 1920s with the Ukraine thing.
Oh. Yeah, that counts. I guess that's easy to explain.
It was sort of protection. That's a special case. Because you could argue about the intentionality of some actions in the Ukraine in the late 1920s. You definitely could.
Just to be absolutely sure, we are talking indeed fact about the Holodomor, right?
If you broadly define the Holodomor, yes, but it's like the Holodomor round 1.
Okay, gotcha.
Because you have the 1931 famine and the 1927 famine, but there were also smaller famines. If we start going into that, the episode will be huge and vast, and also it gets very weird and complicated and dark with that chapter of history.
Yeah. Another thing, and I reminded of a much easier example to explain, where autarchy screwed the country over tremendously. Ching Dynasty, China. Because they produced everything they needed, silks, porcelains, woods, metals, irons, coal, you name it, the Ching had no use for most Western imports, except one, opium. Needless to say that this kind of protectionist dynamic not only was leading to some very important issues with the Japanese bureaucracy, leading with the exterior, making them incredibly corrupt because then they had an incentive to be, but also basically starting the opium epidemic that would grip China for the next 60, 70, 90 years?
160? No,
depends on when you start counting when they started getting the opium in truly massive quantities, and especially when the opium production within China started also skyrocketing. But
but if we count autarky leads to conflict, then I think then there's a lot of examples. But that's,
Yeah.
some would dispute whether that's a part of the autarky or part of the foreign invasion to maintain the opium importation.
That is true. But
Yeah.
still, okay. Let's not go with the opium example. Let's go with the. I guess it wasn't a Chinese economic crash, but but the Chinese economy did get a violent check once Spanish gold dried up, because until that, not Spanish gold, Spanish silver, I think, because during the. Yeah, because that was another thing that the West had in tremendous amounts, and China basically essentially was trying to. Wait, didn't? The more I think about this, isn't this literally an example of an economy suffering in an inflationary crisis under a non-fiat currency? Because that's what happened to China, well, in Spain as well, when talking about silver. Because like the issue is that the economy is growing backed on Spanish silver, so we're backing up more on Spanish silver, even though this is actually causing kind of a bit of a harsh trade imbalance.
Because because silver doesn't necessarily lead to deflation. It just leads to the tying of the rate, not to any human decision you can make for the best of the country, but the speed of mining, whatever it may be.
And when the Spanish gold started drying up, Spanish silver started drying up, the Chinese economy, for lack of a better term, had a little heart attack. Which, because this is China, the scale of that little heart attack means it was absolutely fucking devastating.
Oh yeah, it was huge. There was also a smaller version of this earlier with the Japanese and their silver. Because the Japanese had silver that they were selling to the Chinese, but then it dried up.
Yeah. So...
Which is why they were so keen on the Spanish silver, because that's where they had gotten their silver from previously.
Yeah. But again, because they were only importing silver at quite an unfair price, but due to their autarkic and protectionist... I mean, again, autarky, although not necessarily tied to protectionism, I can think of rare periods in history where autarky and protectionism were just not connected, at least in spirit, if not necessarily in practice and policy.
Definitely, they're motivated by the same principle.
Yeah. The
Albania, 1960s maybe.
That also counts, yes.
Because they weren't as such like protectionist, but they did become autarchical. But that wasn't deliberate.
No, that is true. Again, while we are here overly harshly dunking on autarkics, the historical examples we are using are actually intensely complicated, and the considerations do go a bit beyond about disproving autarky in of itself. But
yeah, so really, I think but the problem is that when you give examples, you want to give dramatic examples, but obviously, dramatic examples are more complicated. Like I think, if we were to have a over a long period of time, look at the effect of autarky on relatively stable economies, we could see that it has a moderate detrimental effect or whatever it may be. But that's not as interesting in the podcast format as saying, oh, the Chinese were autarchical with the silver thing, and so the opium came in, or the Sultanate of Bijapur was, all they wanted to buy was red cloth, I think, and so they lost Goa.
Wait, they gave us Goa.
Well, I'm not sure they would. They ended up giving Goa, but I'm not sure that the Sultan of Bijapur was like 100 chuffed about it.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, Is what I meant. I'm aware that there wasn't a seizure of Goa in that way. That's not what I
meant. Yeah, or am I mistaken Goa with Macau? Either case, one of the two was given to us because we made real good cannons back then.
Yeah, well, that's Macau.
Wow, I'm an idiot about my own country's history.
Yeah, no, I mean, Goa was in fact taken by the sword.
Oh well.
Yeah.
It makes sense because it was taken by the I can't believe I forgot his name, the first viceroy of India, who also went beast mode on the Indian Ocean and also got Hormuz and I think Muscat as well.
Afonso de Albuquerque.
That's the dude. God, why am I?
That's the one who died in a very strange and controversial way in Africa.
Yeah, his death isn't really talked about here much, but apparently over there in South Africa, it's one of those nation-defining moments, which is.
I'm not sure it's quite it's a nation-defining moment in some circles. We've referenced it, so I think we should tell the story.
Sure. I mean, this is still going to be an hour-long episode, and this will segue nicely into colonialism.
We're vibing on a theme. Yeah, so what happened was that Afonso de Albuquerque, there you go. That one's for you, McCusk. On his way back to Portugal, he stopped. I think they stopped to gather water on the shores of South Africa, incidentally very near where Cape Town is today. And of course they would, while being let off the ship, being on dry land, I'm sure they wanted to stretch their legs, and so a couple of Portuguese soldiers who were on board, they ventured out into the wider area, and they met the Khoikhoi, and they started stealing cattle from the Khoikhoi, and and obviously the Khoikhoi retaliated, and they gathered their forces, and the Portuguese, who were trapped upon the beach because they were very much caught unawares, suffered a defeat to the Khoikhois, in which Afonso ended up dying. But this is an event that has garnered a lot of speculation as into what happened, because it seems to many to be a rather strange incident that the very same Afonso who had beaten forces many times his size at Malacca and Hormuz. I think he didn't win at Aden, but yeah, that he would be beaten by such a relatively, let's put it, simple foe.
I mean, being simple doesn't mean much if they're well trained and well adapted. But
yeah, no, I mean, clearly they were a very, very well disciplined force, but the manner in which he became caught upon the beach is to many. I actually think that I could see it happening. That they just stole some cows, and then a much bigger retaliation than they expected happened. But some say that in fact, some go as far to say that the attack of the Khoikhoi was pre-planned, which I think is ridiculous. Others say that and this is more reasonable, that Afonso, who was unpopular with some of his crew, which he was because he denied them some pillage back in India, and then he punish them, and this was seen as bad form, at least by them and also by many of the influential families that they came from, that they orchestrated it such that the Portuguese ships could not rescue them from the beach in time, and so they were left to their fate on the beach. And then this has turned into weird things about how the Genghis Khan of the sea, Afonso, was avenged by the because he did so much plundering. And then this was the beginning of South Africa as a nation, because you got to do some nation building. And I can't remember his name, but there was an art historian who wrote a novel, but then later claimed that the novel is very much based on history, that says that in fact this was a massive conspiracy involving King Manuel and the Pope and the Jesuits and everyone in the Portuguese nobility.
Of course, not convoluted at all. No, sir.
No, that's clearly how reality works, is that the Jesuits and the King of Portugal and the Pope will gather together in one room and coordinate a psyop false flag attack by the Khoikhoi.
Don't you doubt the powers of the Jesuits.
That's right.
Don't you? We know we know their oath. We know what they can do. But now on to the last leg of this episode. The nostalgism for colonialism. And this is a doozy. It is tragically common in our neck of the frozen tundra, that is internet monarchism, but also sadly common in both our countries. No matter the ideological spectrum, well, I suppose now that it is somewhat affected by the ideological spectrum, but one would be surprised on how wide colonial apologia / nostalgism is.
It goes wide.
It's shockingly wide. So, the main issue with colonial nostalgia, I'll spare most the listener the obvious of, oh, we went there and killed people, because we went there and killed people. But you have this nostalgism that Africa and India, to a lesser degree Latin America, were better when they were under European rule. Now, let's ignore the self-evident racialist and racist undertones that this has, because I would hope this is
we shouldn't, but let's.
I said it in such a way that let's not engage into a long-term discussion about it. I hope that the listener knows this much, because Jesus Christ, and oh God, the next QA will either be nothing at all or will be something. In either case, the big logic here is that there exists this belief that under European colonial authority, things were better. There was peace, there was stability, there were trains, there were streets, there was public lighting, etc., etc., etc. Now, we must first state two things. First, not to say that the Europeans did not build railways, did not build public lighting, and did not build streets and houses. They only did this where it was convenient for them, and primarily for Europeans, not the natives. In Africa, where the only cities that had any amount of electrical power were the headquarters of massive corporations that carried out, sometimes using virtual slave labor and brutal human exploitation. Second, the railways were again primarily for European colonial interests and often economically useless throughout, being mainly for ferrying around troops rather than connecting to anything useful. And three, this was rarely the case for the entire. I guess I can use the term country because they would become countries most of the time. So, Not that this was the case in the entirety of the colonized country. This was often done at the expense of everywhere else that wasn't like the big port city or the big city, where the colonizers made their abode, for lack of a better term. Another thing, and this is, I think, very important. When we think of colonialism, we do, inexplicably, think of snazzy uniforms, essentially, much the same way people think that the Napoleonic Wars were somehow not brutal because everyone had a rather dapper uniform. The same does, even more inexplicably, apply to the entire experience of colonialism, especially the new imperialism phase from the scramble of Africa to its bitter end.
I think the second LARP and Cringe episode is relevant here.
But essentially, people exclusively in the West, and this includes you Americans as well, though less because you often are. I mean, no, fuck it. No, I've seen Americans who are utterly apologetic of European colonialism. So fuck it. You take you guys.
No, we're
you guys take
we're
this
not
well.
any blows.
Now. People forget how Europeans maintained power in their colonies, and now some would say, oh, but it was divide and conquer and just pitting them against each other. It wasn't that bad. Well, one wonders since when encouraging ethnic and racial and cultural strife is not that bad, but okay, but more to the point. That's at best 1/5 of what made the Europeans keep power for as long as they did. The core reason of why Europeans kept power was not due to our development, not due to our racial superiority, and yes, I have heard people tell me that to my face in the year 2020 of our Lord. Thankfully, in 2021 it has yet to happen. Technological superiority, although that played a part, turns out the gap wasn't as big because, I mean, come on now, illegal arms trade was a thing even back then. It was on one thing, so the other 4/5, and that is fear and terror. Because we often forget, but we've all heard of the pacification expeditions that were often declared. What people don't know is how the European troops in their snazzy uniforms marched up to tons of villages, potentially every single one in their route, and literally shot up the place, man, woman, and children too. We are forgetting that how brutally repressed any serious amount of Indian descent was throughout both the Company period and the Raj, and in Africa the amount of, for lack of a better terms, impromptu genocides that were conducted against sometimes even the slightest amount of dissent. The true picture of the European colonizer was not of a genteel guy in a factory somewhere while the Africans worked away tirelessly, seemingly kept in a position of submission because apparently they hadn't learned what freedom was yet, but rather due to the fact that said Africans were, and especially the ruling elites of said Africans, this applies also to Indians as well in this particular context, knew very well what we would do to them should they try something as apparently unreasonable as seeking better conditions or freedom. And that was shoot up the place, chemically or sterilize them was also a tactic that was used rather lackadaisically, and a number of things. So, really, what I want you, dear listener, when you think of European colonialism, think of a barbarian. Think of a barbarian crushing the skull of a young child. The race does not matter. And the face of that barbarian is whatever face you think the West has, because that's what it was. We were literally conducting actions that can only be described as sadistic against other peoples for, we claim, benefit, but truth be told, economic benefit, there was none. Out of the top of my head,
there wasn't that much benefit, not for most people.
I mean, even for the interests that did make some money, the select few companies and corporations, because God knows even colonial corporations and chartered companies didn't turn that much of a profit. I mean, I guess if you were in the diamond mining business, you could make a tidy sum, but still, the human cost.
People forget how often the Dutch East India Company went bankrupt.
Mm-hmm. And the British East India Company and the various Portuguese colonial companies.
Yeah, it's. I think it might be in the double digits for each of them.
Mm-hmm. No, like the big issue here is that I know of one colony in the entire history of colonialism. To be tragically honest to you, finding good information on the colonialism period is surprisingly difficult, both in Portuguese and in English. I wonder why. But of my admittedly frustrated research into the topic, I've only found mention of a single colony in the entire existence of colonialism. Well, again, let me correct that. In the entire existence of new imperialism, so scramble for Africa till the bitter end, being economically self-sufficient, and place your bets. Let's wait 20 seconds. Okay, I can't wait. If your answer was German Cameroon, then congratulations, you are correct. At least I think it was German.
Nothing. Except you get a point.
Yeah. Well, it was either German Cameroon or it was either German Cameroon or their other colony, whose name I forget, in West Africa. I remember it was like it was amongst the smallest colonies they had, and that was the one where they managed to reach the vaunted levels of economic self-sufficiency. And before you say German efficiency, no, it had to do with very little with German efficiency and the colonial aspects. Turns out German efficiency is a spook.
German efficiency is the biggest spook of all time.
Yeah, I've seen how the Nazis run their regime. There was a lot of stuff there. Efficiency and lack of corruption was not one.
Anyways,
still,
I think we've made points about,
all three aspects.
The nature of nostalgism itself, but also, slaying the sacred cows of the nostalgists. I'm gonna hype it up a bit. But yeah, it's just, before we leave off for today, I'd like to say that next episode is indeed the Q&A. The third one. Yay! And, just because apparently we've not done the best job of making this clear, but now we're telling you in advance, is that the Q&A is on Discord. So if you want to ask the questions, then you need to join the Discord, which is in the doobly-doo, as they say. Yeah, now that we're social media influencers. And,
we don't speak in fluencies.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, I wish I could tell you a date, but no.
It's complicated. We will find a way to communicate.
It will be on the Discord. That's the best advice I can give you.
Yeah, but we'll find a way to put it on YouTube at least.
Maybe.
Somehow.
We'll try.
We can hope. In any case, this has been Monarchism Unfiltered. I've been one of your hosts, Makosk.
And I've been the other host, Bronze. And remember to smash like and hit the subscribe button on whatever platform it is that you're listening on.
Oh yeah, because I forgot we do have this on multiple platforms. In any case,
on all the platforms, wherever it is that you find podcasts.
That is true. In any case, goodbye.
Yeah, and good night.